So here we are. Christmas is over, New Year's is over, and Food Bites is about ready to start for going into the winter. But I'm fortunate to have Jane here with me today. I mean, we've done this a couple of times, but I think it's important because we like to talk about just the kind of overall situation of food in the city, not just about the food bank. But when it comes to the food bank, what a Christmas, eh?
Yeah, it's
What a
been amazing.
December.
Yeah.
Do you have a highlight from it?
I just think people's generosity, we've been overwhelmed with the numbers of families coming in, overwhelmed with the number of agencies needing some extra help, but just the incredible generosity from businesses, from individuals, from different companies and employees group. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah, things like Tim Hortons, right? Like they came out of the blue. There's something like 70 Tim Hortons in London,
Yeah.
but they met with us and said that they would like to do the Smile Cookie campaign. And we knew because it was Tim's, it would probably be pretty special. But man, I mean, lots of Tim's ran out of cookies, right?
Yeah.
But at the
Yeah.
end of the day, Tim's had raised $222,000 over the course of that 5 days. Now, half of that went to the Tim Hortons camps, which of course we really support, but the other half came to us. But I was just so impressed with how the community got onto that pretty quick, and it was only a 5 day time frame.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing. It's tough to talk about so many, like that's a highlight definitely,
Mm-hmm.
but like so many individuals, we whether it's $100 or whether it's $5. There was a doctor who came down with his son who had set up a family foundation. He brought like a check down, came with his son, and just we gave him a tour, and just people who came down and saw what we were doing were overwhelmed. The numbers of volunteers at the food bank, so even people who couldn't give but could actually, when they could get in at the food bank, just spend a couple hours helping out. It was definitely a community coming together.
Yeah. Now, you and I were there at the Business Cares kickoff at the beginning of December at RBC Place. That's something like 700 businesses or
Yeah,
something
pretty amazing.
altogether. But this year, nobody knew quite what to expect because it's just been that kind of year, and food bank demand is up so high. So we just didn't know. Now, I know that you're on that committee that helped to organize it and stuff, but how did you feel it went this year? Did you have a highlight or two from that?
It went tiki boo in the context of just again the number of individuals and the numbers of businesses that were involved.
Mm-hmm.
There was some new members on the committee, so that was great to meet some more new folks.
Yeah.
Most of the folks who had been involved in years past were still involved, so you've got kind of the social memory from
Yeah.
the institutional memory and some new individuals there. I think that was amazing. I think the CCH students have the LEAP students have been involved for a number of years, but
Mm.
this year as well, they were there. It was great. It's tough to kind of point out, though. The you weren't there for the final gathering, but just again having everybody come and just
Mm.
say how, you know, just see the food and see the donation was great. And of course, they didn't know how it went, and they didn't set a goal. They would be glad for whatever came in, but more came in this year than last year, even in the midst of the expensive food going up.
Yeah.
It was great.
Yeah, but it was
It was,
11% over the year
yeah,
before.
it's pretty
And
amazing.
I don't think we were expecting that. I mean, I think real credit goes to Wayne Dunn and his organizing
Yeah,
abilities for
for sure.
pulling all that together. But I think, we all kind of held our breath, wondering how it would go because, our demand is up 43% in a year. So, all of this stuff really, really matters when you're that close to the bone. And I think Business Cares really came through in a big way. And we thank all of those folks for what they were doing. But there was more. CBC came down to the food bank. They came down to do their live morning show. They'd never done it at the food bank before. It's called Sounds of the Season, and CBC does it for food banks. But in our case, it was usually someplace else where you had the live show. But this year, they wanted to do it at the food bank. So what was so great about that was that all of our volunteers were there and the staff was all there. They came at like 6 in the morning or 6:30 in the morning to get
Wow.
set up
Yeah.
with CBC. And I mean, it was awesome. But then the public started coming in and it was right beside the door where the public comes in and drops off food supplies or makes donations. So you could see that and hear it. What was great. What I liked about it was it was so noisy. I'm sure it drove the producers at CBC nuts, but you could hear the door going up, a truck backing up, a dolly cart going across the concrete floor and everything else. And it was just but it was so real.
Yeah. Oh,
I was supposed to come forward for an interview with Steve Brown, who's the
Andrew
host,
Brown.
Andrew Brown, sorry, who was doing it at the beginning. And so as we were doing it, it was fine. But then he wanted to do a second one, interview later on in the show. So I went up to do it, and I thought, okay, what's this one going to be about? And they're just brief. But he said, did you ever feel like going back into politics when
Oh,
you see all
well,
the
I guess
stuff?
this is one of my highlights too.
Yeah. So I thought, what? So I gave a funny look to the crowd, and they laughed. But I said, look, at this is democracy to me. And I pointed to all the folks that were there, all the food that was coming in. And I just pointed out, it was a bit of an emotional time for me, but I just pointed out that, these people they're from right across the political spectrum. They're right across the economic spectrum, the religious spectrum. All of that stuff was all there, and yet they never fight. And so some of those people have been volunteering with us for decades. They know what the task is. They know what the community needs, and they come together and they follow leadership from people like you or Brian down at the food bank. I just feel that is the democracy that we really need in this day and age. That's just my feeling. I think we're having trouble trusting politics because it's not solving our differences. It seems to be exacerbating it.
Mm-hmm.
But in this particular case, I think these citizens of London, Ontario, and that included the corporate citizens who were there, have found ways of putting that stuff aside and just making the city better. And I think that was just a real highlight for me.
Yeah.
It was important.
Definitely true. I mean, in an age where people are dividing over particular things, and it's really tough.
Yeah.
The ability to find common ground, and we have more common ground than we realize. But when it comes to helping, we've got huge common ground.
Yeah.
And I definitely think that's a beautiful thing about food banks across the country.
Yeah.
Is that people of all stripes come together to help. People of all stripes, all religions, all genders, all of those things. It's just community helping community.
All the time. It's amazing. And they do it so consistently every week for years and years and years. If they were ever going to split up over whatever it is, they would have done it by now, but they haven't. They've stayed true to their purpose for being there, and it's really helped us. And we have such a small staff compared to other food banks that if it wasn't for volunteers, we would be in all sorts of trouble.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question? Can we segue a little bit from the food bank to
Well,
food?
I just want to add one more thing, and then we'll segue.
Yeah.
The media. I mean, I thought the media was so fantastic this December. I mean, it's hard for them. They're covering all the homeless stuff. They're realizing all the social pressures that are descending on communities across the country. It's not been a positive time. People are having trouble trusting. It's not easy, right? But in the middle of all that, they still can see when a community comes together to do something good. They've done that for other organizations as well. But because Christmas was that time of year when so many came together, I really appreciated that as many people in the media got involved as they did. Even past media members, right, all came out and helped out with it. And I think, okay, this is supposed to be me interviewing you, but you do your segment.
No. Well, the segue to Food Bites. You've been doing Food Bites for a year and a half.
Yeah.
You've had a bit of a break. This is, we just had Christmas and New Year's. What's coming up in Food Bites, or how are you feeling about how it's going and the people you've interviewed?
I think whenever I think of Food Bites, I just think of how much I appreciate Rogers Television. I'm just being honest. I mean, they just include us, right? And they're so easy to work with. They're great, but that's their mandate. They want people to have these discussions about broader community life. And the fact that they would work with somebody like me, I think is awesome. I know you have your art show on Monday nights, and they're great to do that as well. But I think it's important for me that I don't feel like I'm being censured or being told to do this or told to do that. I'm just able to live out the life that I feel about food in this community. So it's a real shout out to Rogers that they have permitted that to happen. As far as how I feel about the show itself, I really felt that there was a need to put food on the agenda for London. We all know it's there, but I wanted to bring different aspects of it in. So, for instance, I brought in the mayor of Halifax 3 times and how he's trying to get his city to become more modern, how they're going to handle food. I brought in the Speaker of the House of Commons twice, right? I brought in a mayor, right, from St. Thomas, Joe Preston. So there were the larger pictures that were there. I brought in Carolyn Bennett and talked about mental health stuff. But then there was the London stuff. I think of people like Cheryl Forchuk, who's probably the main homeless researcher, health and homeless researcher in the country. She's right here in
Mhm.
London. And so she's graciously come 3 times. And then I think of people like John Fleming, the former city manager. He came 3 times because we were talking about how you build a food city, what you do around that, what's happening with planning with other cities. So I really appreciated that he did that. I think when it came to locally, though, I tried to stick out of politics the best that I could.
Mhm.
I didn't want to do that. And I do think that it became obvious to me, though, as the year was going on, that London was moving into a crisis about food. We're having
Yes.
trouble keeping up with the demand. Like we've gone up 91% in 2 years,
Yeah.
right? In demand. It's really significant. You don't want to keep going on a donation model. That's the way that I see it. I think it's very important. I think it'll always be
Yeah.
the critical mass of how we help. But at some point in a city like London that's surrounded by such great farmland, but most of that food doesn't come in here, people have to start thinking and asking the question, how do we start growing our own? How do we start sustaining? How do we have more markets? Those things. So I think Food Bites is evolving into that, and that's what the next few months are going to be. And one of the things I've really wanted to emphasize in the next few months is Food Policy Council. Now, that was a huge thing that you did.
Mhm.
But initially, it was the Food Bank, the London Community Foundation, the City of London,
And the health unit.
and the Health Unit, along with some other little groups. But those were the main four. And they did some fantastic work together, 10 years ago. And it was great. And one of the things they wanted was a Food Policy Council. So it was started. But it's had trouble because it's not getting the support that it needs. So I am we really need that kind of research, especially around food security. So I think I really want to see that get emphasized in the coming months up till the summer.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great thing. I think the food policy councils across the country have struggled due to the pandemic.
Some have closed. Right?
Some have closed, yeah. It's just but it's built on the idea of policy and talking about issues of the whole food system and making a sustainable, affordable system for everybody. So when we talk about the food bank, we talk about food insecurity. But when you talk about food policy, you're talking about security, food security for all. It's kind of one of the distinctions you've made. I mean, I think some of those policy discussions are incredibly important. And it's, from, they call it from farm to fork in terms
field
of
to forks,
field to
yeah.
forks, whether it's from the farm and the production, then through the processing, the distribution, obviously to what we eat, but even all the way through to food waste in terms of what we do. So there's this whole cycle thing that happens. And the food system is so complex, and it requires a group that understands that some of the complexities and I hate the word stakeholders, but different people and different expertise coming together and talking about it and hashing those things out. I think it's incredibly important to do.
Yeah.
So one of the great things, and I know you're going to do a little bit more about this, is the community food assessment.
Yeah.
Community food assessment was done.
Maybe my favorite document ever.
What is it, 200 pages, et cetera. Back in 2016, I believe, over 5 years ago. So it's, it was updated last year.
Yeah.
Some other research was done with regards to.
Thanks to the city. The city gave some money.
The city gave some money to actually help get that done. The health unit, of course, has a person has given, a part-time in terms of a position that's been able to actually support that as well, and is one of the main reasons that's kept the Food Policy Council going. So Western Fair is housing it in terms of the office there. And, it's all these community partners have come together, and I think it's a difficult thing to talk about in terms of what they do. It's easy to talk about a food bank and go, what do you do? Well, we take food from people who have it, and companies that have it, and we give it to people who need it. And there's a whole bunch of mechanisms how we give it to people who need it through other agencies and how we get it and food safety, but it's a really visible and tactile thing. Food policy, like how do you describe that? When it's a systems level kind of thing, it's pretty tough. But basically, it's all about making sure food is healthy, sustainable, and available to all of us.
So the food bank is the financial manager for it. We
with the trustee.
The trustee. So we've done that from back then. But what we're realizing is that it can't really up its game because it doesn't have the support within the community, both financial and other things. So we've decided as a food bank, we're going to invest more heavily in it. which I think is important, but it's also important to know it's the Middlesex London Food Policy Council.
Correct.
So it's all about the region as well. And the reason why policy is important is because all that food is grown out there, not so much inside, but consumed here. But also, 4% of the agricultural land that grows here in Southwest Ontario, of all of Canada, is here in Southwest Ontario. That's all. But it produces 28% of the food in the country. So why is it then that London is having so much trouble, that families are having so much trouble even accessing food? We understand about the affordability piece. I think COVID has kind of helped us understand that way, because food prices suddenly shot up.
Mm-hmm.
They've never come back down. It's not right. It doesn't feel right. But the point is, it's given us all a better understanding as to how do people budget with food. I also think with things like rent or things, we all understand how high rents are. It's just a really difficult time. So I think what you want to do is start availing yourself of the food that's all around you. And then I think also growing interior in London as well. We've tried to do that with the greenhouse. The city has its community gardens, but we need to do that a lot more. But we have to stop thinking about food security as being just for the hungry. Food security, as everybody defines it, is for everybody. So it's got to be accessible. It's got to be affordable. They've got to be able to get the nutrition and other things that they need. That's what we have to fight for as a community. And it's hard to do that in a time when you're going through such a hard time as a community. But it's also the easiest to talk about at a time right now, because everybody's feeling these constraints. So it's how do we turn that in now to becoming more of London becoming a food city, a food secure city. And then if you're going to ask that question, where are you going to get your data from? Are you talking from the food bank? I don't think so. The city? No. That's what the Food Policy Council is all about. If you're going to make changes and you need policy and you need research, that's the group that you turn to do it.
Yeah, I think it's a place to actually potentially get some of that. It's a place maybe to gather, just information about what's happening, because we don't necessarily know what's all happening out there as well. Yeah. And I think it's a place to talk about barriers that different sectors are facing.
Yeah.
And then how we can support each other. For instance, you talk about, when we talk about food systems, food businesses are one of the major growth areas when it comes to small businesses. Well, they face certain particular barriers. Yeah. So how is it that we can support particularly the ones in this area? In food processing businesses, right? I know there's a new dairy group opening up just outside of London, the Middlesex area. There's an explosion of vegan food, of vegetarian food, of restaurants. All of those things are part of the food system. So how do we support them? The pandemic was really tough on a lot of those businesses. So how do we get back to it? How do we make it easier for some of our institutions to purchase local food? Yeah. If you can't have a greenhouse in City of London, or some of those kind of things. I think there's some policies or things that we can work on. But again, how do we have a place to have those discussions and support? And I think one of the groups that's part of the Food Policy Council, which is a good example of what you're talking about, it's not food insecurity, it's food for all, is like growing chefs.
Yeah.
Growing chefs, during the pandemic, to some degree, didn't chase funding. They shut down because they were about teaching everybody, all the kids, about how to eat healthily and how to grow food, or getting into schools and talking about food nutrition. That's not, of course, that's for folks that come to the food bank as well, but that's for everybody. Every kid needs to be able to have good nutrition. And, whether it's nutrition programs, the Ontario Nutrition, whatever it is, I think that's the stuff we want to talk about, and that's the stuff we want to support. And there's so many of those levels. Farmers, you've had some great discussions with some of the farmers of the federations. I think it's a great forum to have everybody together. And though we are the trustees, we're the lead, the group is under our legal auspices, right? So we report, we do all of those things. It's not, part of the reason we step back as a food bank is because people immediately put it into the realm of food insecurity.
Yeah, which we don't want.
We don't want. It's this bigger issue. And obviously a thing like food waste, if there's a way not to waste food and it can help people who need help, great. But actually, food wastage is something we all need to learn. So there's so many things to actually talk about, educationally, policy-wise. It's kind of exciting in many ways. It's kind of what Food Bites is all about, isn't it? All these different levels.
Yep. And I think people, much as you do with art, people are beginning to understand there's a whole community out there that is thriving on that stuff. I also think around food, there's lots of people that are concerned or are working on
Yeah.
it. But if you want to know why policy is important, we'd just give you two figures. One is that Canada exports $95 billion worth of food a year. Ontario uh, exports $43 billion worth of processed food a year. We're the third largest exporter in North America. Food bank numbers are at record numbers. Families are now more food insecure than they have ever been, right? So the ability to get food, to even afford food, and yet there's all these huge numbers, and then there's all this social pain that's going underneath. The difference between those two things is not donations, it's policy. It's why are, like, if I'm on Ontario Works and I get $722 a month, how can I afford the London average for an apartment of $2,000 a month? It can't be done. That's policy. And those systems were designed back in the mid 1990s. Like, they need to be upgraded because we're starting to see more and more in homelessness and other things. It's the donation system will always be vital, and it's been fantastic in London. But we're watching it now grow beyond the ability of donation systems, whether it's housing, affordable places, whatever it is, or food. It can't be done that way anymore. There has to be more. Policy needs to re-enter the fray. Politicians need to do that. And I will say it has been frustrating. I mean, we've hardly had anybody from city council who's come to us and wanted to understand food security and talk about it. There've been a couple, but not many. I think with the province, we've been up to Queen's Park and we've talked to people at Queen's Park about it and showed the urgency of it. They all acknowledge it, but they think that the idea that how to handle that then is to give to food banks. So we're trying to say, look at the food banks are almost, shutting down. It's been so much. So I really think policy is key, Jane. But a food policy council doesn't sound very attractive or interesting. But the truth of the matter is that's what will close the gap between those two things that we're talking about. And that's why we as a food bank are really big on investing more into helping it to move forward. And you're our person on the food policy council, so that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of it's work, right?
Yeah.
And work. It's exciting times in terms of the big picture, but obviously the things you have to do to get to there can be frustrating because, of course, it's work. But I think there's, the more that we talk about it, and the more that people involved, I think there's some great things. The community food assessment was released.
Where can somebody see that if they want to?
The community food assessment is, I believe, on the Middlesex London Health Unit website. What we'll make sure is that you have.
I'll put the link on the
Yeah,
video.
put the link on it in terms of there.
Yeah.
And there's some other research. There were some other pieces to that as well in terms of some other pillars. And right now they're working on sort of the sustainable development goals, kind of tying it into some of the social and economic and the environmental things. I think they're the pillars. I think it's good to be able to talk about the big picture. When you talk about growth, you got to know where you're going and you got to see kind of ahead. And even if you're not there, to continue to talk about where you want to go is really important, because I think that's also inspiring and keeps people involved and inspired to make a difference. So, we're still able as a community to assist people within our community that need help.
Yeah.
For sure.
So let's get personal as we close up here. We've been at this 38 years.
I know.
Right.
It's a couple more years away from.
I know.
40
And
years.
our
It's
25th
crazy.
anniversary comes up soon, and we're trying to get away for a trip. It's so hard because the food bank has been so busy. But the point is, we've been at this for almost 4 decades. We're some of the founding members of the associations, both federally and also in the province. And I would have to say that for me, these have been the hardest times for me personally. There's just so much challenge, so much going on, so much need that's there. On the other hand, I don't know if I've ever seen London perform better when it comes to looking out for their neighbors, fellow citizens, and others. It has been astounding that people who can no longer really afford rent or can really afford food are giving more than they did last year. So I don't know. I mean, I don't want people I'm sure are all wondering, when is Glen going to retire? We like Jane, let's keep her around, but let's get rid of Glen. But the point is, these are pivotal moments that we want to help the community get through this trouble. But these aren't moments where we're desperate and throwing out life preservers to everybody and trying to keep everybody's head above water. All that is true, and we're doing those kind of things. But it's a remarkably generous community. But the difference of this giving as opposed to other decades and other times is they're giving till it hurts now. It's really sacrificial now, right? But they've had years and years and years of doing it, and now that it's this little bit higher, they dig down even deeper and are able to do it. So I think for me personally, we haven't talked about this, but for me personally, these are the best of times and the worst of times, right? When I look at our community, I'm just blown away, and it's right to say we're humbled by it, but I'm also empowered by it. Yeah. That we're in this fight, all of us together, and it's going to work. Do you have those same feelings, or do you have different ones?
I think of the same feelings in the context. There's always been a bit of that yin and yang with the food bank, particularly when you're down there dealing with individual stories and you're seeing the pain of what people's going through. And then, in the afternoon, a family comes down to spend some time or give. So you see the best of the community and obviously the worst in terms of what people are going through. I think what's different about this time is that when we first started, we basically were taking what we had and that's what we give. The community is like the London Food Bank is like, we're solvent, we're great. People have been wonderful in terms of the donations, in terms of both money and food. But I look at other groups and I realize we don't just have the responsibility for us. We have a responsibility for other groups, dozens of other groups. And so, for instance, when we talk about other food banks going down, I mean, it's not necessarily us. It's the church in a smaller center or whatever that can't get volunteers. You talk to a lot of different agencies that have had difficulty getting their volunteers to come back. Well, the biggest complaint about volunteers is they can't get a space in the food bank. Like, we're just exploding, and I think that means we have a special responsibility to assist and look at other groups, particularly within the London area, but we're also part of a provincial association and give what we can. So I think that's what sort of changed a little bit. Before, we were always giving to other agencies, and that was part of our mandate. But really, it's like, this is what we do. Here you go. This is what we have, and we've spread it around. But I really feel a lot for what they're going through.
Yeah, no, that's true.
So I think that's going to be one of our major focuses over the next couple of years.
Yeah, we have special meetings about that even now. But I mean, it's not just the demand coming to us. It's the demand of other agencies asking us to take over a lot of the stuff that they're doing. So we're trying to assess how to do all that. But I think it's been great because I think London and the business community and others understand that a gift to the food bank is a gift to them, not just the food bank. So you're able to spread it around, and we have a responsibility to take those special donations, and we appreciate what people do and get it out there. So it's 38 years. I'm not done yet. I'm ready to keep going. I hope we can get away for our anniversary. But the point is, I think that this is the time everybody needs to show up. We're here, and we're here because we get inspired to be here by the community we live in. But we all need to fight for better policy. I think that's the thing I really want to see food banks move towards in the next few months. We need to close these gaps between what we believe in and actually how we live. And it's policy that will do that. So we'll talk about that in the future. Thanks for doing this, Jen.
This is awesome.
Appreciate it. Right. Thanks, everyone.